Dramatic new police body cam footage during the Uvalde, Texas mass shooting has now been released.
Yeah, the footage shows the chaos and confusion among police. This was going on for over an hour while the shooter was inside Robb Elementary. Take a look and listen at some of this disturbing footage.
Shots fired!
That's my wife's classroom. He's sitting in the classroom. I got me, right?
You okay?
Yeah.
You okay?
He's in the class.
Now, the Texas House Committee released its preliminary report on Sunday, citing systemic failure. Of course, the Uvalde massacre sparked debate and action in the country on gun legislation, and one of the driving forces behind the legislation is joining us now, Senator Chris Murphy, who is in D.C. Today. Thank you so much. Good to have you on the program. And like I just mentioned, what happened in Uvalde sparked that conversation and debate and ended up in legislation. Some of the first we've seen on gun reform in some 30 years in this country. But now, after we see the report about what happened in Uvalde, and you've seen or at least read reports of it, it seems that only guns were a part of the failure there or the problem there in Uvalde. What do you make of what you're seeing in the report about the Uvalde massacre?
The conduct of the police was unacceptable. I just can't imagine what parents are going through knowing that there were hundreds of police officers outside that school, outside that classroom, doing nothing and frankly not paying attention to any of the active shooter protocols that have been in place for years. But what it proves is that you can't make these places safer just by putting a lot more trained personnel with guns in the proximity of a mass shooter. We need to get these dangerous assault weapons out of the hands of young men whose brains are breaking, who are contemplating mass murder, and these people who've been out there for years saying the only way to stop a bad guy with a gun is to put a whole bunch of good guys with guns in close proximity. Well, this is proof that that's not actually how it plays out in reality. So, our focus now needs to be on making sure that these weapons of war don't get into the hands of the wrong people. These videos are awful to watch, but I think they're just proof for a lot of us that it's all about making sure that weapons only get in the hands of the right people.
Yeah, and Senator Murphy, I wanted to kind of play off of that because unfortunately we saw another shooting that could have been significantly worse in Indiana at that mall, where police are hailing a legally armed bystander as a hero for stopping what could have been an even worse tragedy. 3 people unfortunately lost their lives, several others injured, but it was because there was a legally armed bystander that police say things didn't get much worse. I want to get your reaction to that.
But 3 people still died. I mean, is that the trade-off that we're willing to accept? Are we going to arm all of our citizens in shopping malls and churches and schools and congratulate ourselves when only 3 or 10 or 15 people die? This is absurd. This is absurd. Why are we allowing so many people to have weapons in the first place? Why is it okay that 3 people died in this mall? Yes, a hero was involved here, but this idea that we now are forced to rely on vigilante justice, that we all have to be armed to the teeth in order to make sure that a mass murder is only 3 or 4 instead of 10 or 15, that is a problem that only exists in the United States of America, and we just shouldn't accept it. Communities that have more guns have higher rates of gun homicide and violence, not lower rates. So the more guns that exist in a community, the more at risk you are for violence. Now, I don't think that somebody under 21 years old should be able to buy an assault weapon. So I just think you should make a decision that if you are under 21 years old, you shouldn't be able to get your hands on a weapon of war. But this mythology that good guys shoot bad guys, it's just not how it plays out in reality. The more guns that exist in communities, the higher levels of exposure you have to losing your life. That's just what the data says. And
Senator Murphy, we know you have been fighting for stricter gun control legislation in the 10 years that have passed since the unbelievable tragedy that befell a community that, of course, you represent in Sandy Hook, Newtown Elementary School. And yes, we saw President Biden celebrating, or at least touting, this legislation that finally was passed. But last week, and he did this in front of the families of victims lost to mass shootings, and one of the fathers who lost his son in Parkland said this to President Biden. He said, "We have to do more than that." You met with some of those parents. What more needs to be done? What more can be done?
Well, that man who stood up, his name is Manny Oliver. He's a friend. He lost his child in Parkland, and it's true. We have to do more. The bill we passed will save thousands of lives, and I'm glad finally after 30 years Congress came together and passed life-saving, groundbreaking legislation. But it's got to be the start, not the end. Again, to me, these assault weapons just should be in the hands of the military and law enforcement, not in the hands of civilians. I think everybody in this country should go through a background check before they buy a gun. We have more background checks happening in this country because of this law, but everybody that buys a gun in a commercial sale should have to prove that you're not a criminal. And these are things that are supported by the vast majority of Americans. The majority of Republicans today support banning assault weapons. So these are not things that are actually that controversial outside of Washington, D.C. And if we did those two things, ban assault weapons, universal background checks, we wouldn't violate anybody's Second Amendment rights. We wouldn't stop anybody from being able to buy a gun to hunt or to protect their home, but we would make this country a lot safer.
All right, Senator Chris Murphy, we certainly appreciate your time and for joining us today. Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, hey there, GMA fans. Robin Roberts here. Thanks for checking out our YouTube channel. Lots of great stuff here. So go on, click the subscribe button right over here to get more of awesome videos and content from GMA every day, anytime. We thank you for watching, and we'll see you in the morning on GMA.